After 40 years of work, my retirement party was supposed to be the happiest night of my life. Family, friends, colleagues all gathered to honor me. I had no idea the night would end with betrayal so dark it still sends shivers down my spine. I noticed it almost by accident. My daughter-in-law, Julia, hovering too close to my glass, fingers shaking as she stirred something in. She didn't think anyone was watching, but I was. My heart raced. Was I imagining it? Was this paranoia? No, something inside told me to trust my instincts. So, when she turned away, smiling sweetly as if nothing had happened, I made my move. Quietly, I switched our glasses. What happened next wasn't just shocking. It tore the mask off Julia's perfect act and revealed the danger lurking right inside my family. My name is Margaret, and after 40 years of working in education, I finally reached the day everyone dreams of: retirement. My colleagues often joked that the school would fall apart without me, but I knew it was time to step aside. This party, thrown in my honor, was meant to be a celebration of everything I had accomplished. Friends, co-workers, and most importantly, family had all gathered under one roof. As I looked at the decorations and listened to the music playing softly in the background, I felt both proud and grateful. But beneath the joy, there was a strange heaviness in my heart I couldn't explain. I thought it was just nerves or the emotion of saying goodbye to a long career. I had no idea it was something far darker. The house was buzzing with excitement. My daughter had arranged flowers, my colleagues brought gifts, and my son Michael proudly gave a speech about how hard I'd worked all these years. I smiled at him, my heart swelling with pride. But when I turned my head, I caught Julia, his wife, watching me closely. Her smile was polite, but her eyes didn't match. There was something cold, almost calculating in her gaze. I brushed it off, telling myself I was being unfair. After all, it was my party. I refused to believe that anything could spoil it. But as the evening unfolded, that uneasy feeling kept returning, like a shadow I couldn't shake. Michael leaned close to me during the evening, whispering, "Mom, you deserve this night more than anyone." His words melted my heart, and for a moment everything felt perfect. But then Julia stepped between us, her hand looping through his arm. "Don't let her get too emotional, Michael," she said lightly, though the undertone felt sharp. I forced a smile, but inside, I felt her words land like a slap. I had always sensed Julia's distance, her polite tone, her forced compliments. But tonight it seemed different. She wasn't just indifferent, she was watchful, as though she was waiting for something. Throughout the evening, Julia played her role well. She handed me a glass of champagne, kissed my cheek, and praised my dedication. To the guests, she was the perfect daughter-in-law, attentive, caring, supportive. But I had lived long enough to know when someone's smile hid something else. Each time she placed a hand on my shoulder or refilled my glass, I felt the falseness radiating from her. I told myself I was imagining things, that perhaps the years of subtle tension between us had made me paranoid. But my instincts whispered otherwise. They told me something was wrong. As the speeches began, I raised my glass with everyone else. Laughter filled the room as stories of my years at the school were shared. I laughed too, though my laughter felt slightly hollow. Julia stood beside Michael, smiling at the right times, clapping politely, never missing her cues. On the surface, it was perfect. Yet I caught her watching me more than once. Her eyes not warm, but measuring, like she was waiting for something to happen. My stomach twisted, but I kept quiet. After all, who wants to be suspicious at their own retirement party? Later in the evening, I excused myself to greet a guest. When I returned, I noticed Julia standing near my glass. She quickly stepped back as if nothing had happened, but I caught the faintest tremor in her hands. She smiled too quickly, saying, "Oh, I was just moving it for you." My eyes narrowed, though I forced a gracious smile. Something inside me, instinct, intuition, whatever you call it, screamed that I had just witnessed something important. As I lifted the glass, I hesitated. Had I imagined the slight shimmer of powder dissolving at the bottom? Was it just the bubbles from the champagne catching the light? My heart pounded in my chest as Julia watched me expectantly. Suddenly, the warmth of the party, the laughter, the music, all of it faded into background noise. My hand shook as I lowered the glass, pretending to sip. For the first time that evening, a terrifying thought entered my mind. What if my daughter-in-law hadn't come here to celebrate me, but to destroy me? I sat there, glass in hand, forcing laughter as another colleague told a funny story from the past, but my eyes kept drifting back to Julia. Had I really seen her drop something into my drink? Or had my imagination run wild? At my age, people love to say you're too cautious or too suspicious. Maybe I was just tired, overwhelmed by all the emotions of the evening, but my gut wouldn't let go of the image, the faint tremor in her hand, the way she stepped back when I returned. The room felt both warm with celebration and cold with danger at the same time. I thought back to moments when Julia's hostility had slipped through her smile, the time she told Michael I was too controlling because I reminded him to check his health, the way she always pushed me out of family decisions, as though my opinion had no weight. Even when Lily, my granddaughter, hugged me, Julia's eyes narrowed, jealous of the bond we shared. None of these moments were enough to accuse her of anything. But put together, they painted a picture of someone who didn't want me around. Not just in the family, but in life. A memory flashed 2 weeks earlier. Julia had casually brought up inheritance during dinner. "You've worked hard, Margaret," she'd said sweetly. "But have you thought about who should handle things when you're gone? Michael and I could take care of everything." At the time, I'd brushed it off, joking that I wasn't going anywhere soon. Now, that conversation replayed in my head with chilling clarity. The thought gnawed at me. Was tonight her attempt to speed things up? Instead of confronting her, I chose to watch. I laughed at jokes, clapped during speeches, hugged guests, all while my eyes never strayed too far from Julia. She seemed calm, almost too calm. Every time my glass got low, she appeared, ready to refill it. Her attentiveness would have looked angelic to anyone else, but I felt the menace underneath. My silence became my shield. If she had a plan, I wasn't going to ruin it by alerting her. I needed to know the truth. At one point, Julia leaned close, her voice sugary sweet. "You hardly touched your champagne, Margaret. Come on, it's your night. Drink up." She lifted her own glass as if in solidarity. Her eyes locked on me, daring me to swallow mine. My stomach turned. If she expected me to drink blindly, she was sorely mistaken. I pretended to cough, setting the glass down gently. "I'm pacing myself," I said lightly. Her lips curved into a smile, but her eyes flashed with irritation. The party carried on, but to me, every second felt stretched thin. Music played, people danced, yet I couldn't escape the heavy awareness of that glass sitting on the table. It was like a silent weapon waiting to be used. Julia floated around the room, chatting, laughing, charming everyone in sight. But every so often, her eyes flicked toward me, checking, waiting, and every time I made sure the glass stayed untouched. By the end of the night, I had two choices: convince myself I was paranoid or trust my instincts. I thought of all the times in my life when ignoring my gut had led to regret. Tonight, I wouldn't make that mistake. I looked at Julia's perfectly painted smile, at the glass glistening under the chandelier. And I knew. This wasn't imagination. Something was wrong. Quietly, as laughter echoed around me, I made my decision. I wouldn't drink. In fact, I would make sure Julia did. As the evening wore on, I kept my glass close, waiting for the right moment. My heart pounded in my chest, every instinct screaming at me to act. I'd spent a lifetime teaching children to trust their intuition, and now it was time I trusted mine. Julia floated past me with that too-perfect smile, her laughter ringing hollow in my ears. Everyone else was celebrating, unaware of the silent war happening beneath the surface. I took a deep breath and made my choice. If Julia had laced my drink with something, then she would be the one to face it. The opportunity came when Julia stepped away to greet a guest. I placed my glass next to hers on the table, identical in shape and color. With one swift motion, I swapped them, sliding mine to her side and taking hers for myself. No one noticed. My palms were damp, my breath shaky, but my face stayed calm. To anyone watching, I was just another retiree enjoying her party. But inside, I felt like I had just stepped onto a battlefield. Minutes later, Julia returned, lifting what she thought was her glass. Our eyes met briefly as she raised it to her lips, and in that moment, I felt a surge of both fear and grim satisfaction. She took a delicate sip, smiled, and turned away. My stomach twisted. If I was wrong, I had just played a cruel trick. But if I was right, then she had just drunk her own weapon. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Julia mingled, chatted, and even laughed loudly at a joke. But I noticed the change before anyone else. The way her smile faltered, how she dabbed at her forehead with a napkin, her fingers trembling slightly around the glass. She set it down, glancing nervously around the room. My breath caught. Whatever she had planned for me was now coursing through her own veins. It didn't take long for others to pick up on it. "Julia, are you all right?" one of the neighbors asked. She waved them off with a forced smile, but her skin had gone pale. Michael rushed to her side, concern etched on his face. "Honey, what's wrong?" he demanded. Julia tried to answer, but her words slurred. The room quieted as whispers spread. Everyone turned their eyes toward her, confusion and worry mixing with suspicion. I stayed seated, my glass untouched in front of me. My heart raced, but I forced my expression to remain neutral, almost serene. For years, Julia had underestimated me, believing I was fragile, oblivious. Tonight, I let her assumptions shield me. No one suspected me. They only saw a concerned mother-in-law watching chaos unfold. Inside, I knew I had set this chain of events in motion, but I also knew it was the only way to expose her. Suddenly, Julia swayed on her feet, her knees buckling as Michael caught her just before she hit the floor. Gasps filled the room, guests rushing forward, voices rising in panic. "Call an ambulance!" someone shouted. I rose slowly, steadying myself against the table, my eyes fixed on Julia's pale face. Around us, the party dissolved into chaos, but all I could think was this. She had brought this upon herself. Whatever poison she meant for me had betrayed her instead. And the truth was only beginning to reveal itself. Sirens wailed in the distance as Julia lay limp in Michael's arms, her breathing shallow and uneven. The guests stood frozen, exchanging frightened whispers. When the paramedics burst through the door, the room erupted in a storm of questions. What happened? Did she faint? Was it the wine? Michael shouted, panicked and desperate. I stood a few feet away, calm but watchful, my hands clasped in front of me. I knew the answer he was searching for, but it wasn't my voice that would reveal it. It would be Julia's own downfall. One paramedic glanced at the half-empty glass on the table and frowned. "Did she drink this?" he asked sharply. Michael nodded, confusion on his face. The glass was quickly bagged, the liquid set aside for testing. The guests exchanged uneasy looks. The festive atmosphere shattered. A heavy silence hung in the air, broken only by Julia's weak groans as they lifted her onto a stretcher. I caught sight of the glass and felt a strange sense of justice. That was her trap, her weapon. And now it was evidence. As the paramedics wheeled Julia out, whispers grew louder. Did she poison herself? Why was her drink tested? What's going on? The questions circled the room like vultures. Michael's face turned pale, his jaw tightening as he processed the implications. He had thrown me this party to celebrate my retirement, and instead, it had turned into a scandal. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small or overlooked. I felt powerful, even in my silence. At the hospital, hours later, Michael sat with his head in his hands. I waited patiently in the corner, watching him unravel. When the doctor finally entered, his words sliced through the tension. "We found traces of a sedative in her system. If she'd taken a larger dose, the outcome could have been fatal." Michael's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Sedatives? Why would she—" His voice trailed off. The truth was gnawing at him, but he wasn't ready to say it out loud. Not yet. When Julia regained consciousness, she tried to speak, but her voice cracked under the weight of her lies. It was an accident," she stammered. Michael demanded answers, his voice sharp with anger. "Why was there poison in your glass, Julia? Why?" Her excuses tumbled out, weak and incoherent. She blamed stress, nerves, even me. But her words carried no conviction. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes, not of the poison, but of being exposed. News of the incident spread quickly among friends and colleagues. A retirement party that had been meant to honor me had now become the talk of the town, but not because of me, because of Julia. Neighbors whispered, coworkers speculated, and reputations began to fracture. Michael, once so proud of his polished, picture-perfect wife, now struggled to look at her. She had gambled on my silence, but now her mask was slipping in front of everyone. I sat across from Michael that night, watching the torment in his eyes. Finally, I spoke, my voice steady and deliberate. "She wanted me gone, Michael. You may not believe it, but she laced that drink for me." His face twisted in shock, denial battling with the evidence he could no longer ignore. "No," he whispered, but the cracks in his certainty were widening. For the first time, he truly looked at me, not as a burden, not as an old woman fading into the background, but as the survivor of a betrayal he had failed to see. The hospital's toxicology report left no room for denial. Julia's glass contained a dangerous sedative meant to incapacitate, not simply relax. Michael sat stunned as detectives questioned him, asking about Julia's access, her motives, and our relationship. For once, I didn't shrink into the background. I answered calmly, describing the strange tension, the way Julia had insisted on pouring my drink herself. The detectives listened closely, jotting notes. Julia had always relied on charm and manipulation, but now science and evidence stood against her. When Julia was questioned, her mask cracked completely. She tried to twist the story, claiming she had been set up, that maybe I had planted something. But her words only dug her deeper. The detectives pressed harder, pointing out that the glass had been in her hand. Her possession. Michael sat in the corner, silent, his face hollow with betrayal. For the first time, Julia had no audience to applaud her lies, just cold, piercing eyes demanding the truth. That night, Michael came to me with tears in his eyes. "I never saw it, Margaret," he said, his voice shaking. "I thought she was perfect. I thought she loved me. And all this time," his words broke, and I realized he wasn't just mourning Julia, he was mourning his own blindness. I put a hand on his shoulder, steady but firm. "Sometimes, Michael, we don't see the truth until it tries to kill us." It was the harshest truth I'd ever spoken to my son, but also the most necessary. Julia's perfect image collapsed overnight. The investigation made headlines in local circles. Her friends stopped calling, her social invitations vanished, and whispers followed her everywhere. The woman who had once stood so tall in glittering heels was now seen as a schemer who had nearly poisoned her mother-in-law. Michael distanced himself, his love evaporating under the weight of betrayal. I watched quietly, not with triumph, but with a deep, steady sense of justice. She had planned to erase me, but instead, she erased herself. For weeks after, I found myself waking lighter, as if a shadow had lifted. I tended my garden, wrote letters to old friends, and planned small travels I had long delayed. For once, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. Retirement was no longer about fading away. It was about reclaiming time for myself. Julia's cruelty had nearly destroyed me, but instead it became the push I needed to finally live without fear. Michael and I began to rebuild. He visited often, no longer distracted by Julia's constant demands for status and attention. We cooked simple meals, shared old memories, and spoke openly in a way we hadn't in years. One evening, he said softly, "You saved yourself that night, Mom? You were stronger than all of us." I smiled, not out of pride, but out of relief. At last, he saw me, not as a burden, but as his mother, resilient and unbroken. On the anniversary of my retirement, I hosted a quiet dinner at my home. Just a few close friends, laughter, and warmth. As I raised my glass, I thought back to that fateful night. Julia had tried to poison me, to silence me forever. But instead, I was here, alive, free, and stronger than before. He thought I'd walk away broken, I whispered to myself, echoing a truth I had earned. But I walked away free. The past no longer haunted me. It had armed me. And this time, the story ended on my terms.